Hello, everyone. Welcome to Personalization Outbreak Podcast number 9. We had a great conversation about mental health in times of crisis last week, and now we shift to education and identify the trends in higher education as it reinvents itself to teach in remote environments and provide the necessary curriculum to better equip students to today's new realities that are impacting the workplace and the marketplace. Now, to discuss this topic, we invited Sandeep Krishnamurthy, the Dean of the Business School at the University of Washington, Bothell, along with our co-host, Professor Scott Lacey, Associate Dean of the Colleges of Arts and Sciences at Fairfield University. We discussed the complex variables that are impacting higher education that has long suffered from the limitations of standardization. We identified the root causes of these limitations, such as the tyranny of average, the boomerang student workers phenomenon, and the sage on stage versus the guide on side methods. So hang tight and enjoy the show. You are listening to Personalization Outbreak, a podcast about the collapse of traditional corporate standards in today's more personalized world. I'm Glenn Yopes. I'm a leadership strategist, author, contributor to Forbes, and founder of the Leadership in the Age of Personalization movement. On this show, I'm interviewing executives across multiple sectors to find out how the balance between standardization and personalization can exist. Sandeep, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much, Glenn. It's my pleasure.
So Sandeep, I got to start off with this question. Now, why do you find your most authentic self when playing chess?
Yeah, yeah. I think, one of the things that I've learned about myself is that, that really, I don't know why I'm wired this way, but I really have both left brain and right brain, capabilities. And I think we all do to some degree. We may have, developed more along one side or the other, but I find that imagination and analytical thinking are not opposed to each other. They can coexist. And in fact, if you really look at some of the greatest achievers in many fields, for example, Einstein has said that imagination is more important than what we would commonly regard as, kind of analytical thinking or critical thinking. So I think the creative imagination provides an impetus, and I think it really melds beautifully with analytical thinking at the extreme, I think. And so I enjoy both sides of it. I enjoy sort of the mechanistic calculation part of it, but I don't like to stop there. I think the element of surprise, the visual pattern recognition, the role of structure, conceptual understanding versus, incremental understanding, a positional view versus, really some sort of a transactional view. So those are the sorts of things that chess is great in pushing. And I'm completely self-taught, and I'm no grandmaster yet, but I'm very enthusiastic chess player, and I feel like I learn something every time I play, and even if I lose, I learn. So I think it's about, I find it expansive. I find it innovative. Yeah.
Sandeep, you just brought me back to remind me of my father. It's been 7 years now since he passed at the age of 97. But my father had both left brain, right brain. He was a chemist, graduate from Cornell, but he was also a musician. And he brought these two things together to create what today is known as crossover music.
Right.
In fact, if you Google Los, like Los Angeles, LOS, and then my last name, LLOPIS, you'll see the indelible impact he's left on the world. And I would tell you that part of his legacy is twofold, not just with the music that he brought, but he was one of the 3 chemists who formulated Miller Lite. So I share this because the power of using both the left brain and the right brain could certainly take you on a path to multiplying one's legacy. Now, let's shift gears.
Let's do it.
I mean, we're experiencing unprecedented times with both COVID-19 and all this social unrest. I mean,
Correct.
Sandeep, why aren't leaders prepared enough when crisis strikes? Now, I understand that these are unprecedented times with crises that we could have never expected. Well, maybe one side of the ledger, but why in general aren't leaders prepared enough for crises in your opinion?
Yeah, I think, one can answer that from, in many different ways, but let me start out with a higher education perspective.
Please.
So I think the way leaders are taught really affects how they lead. And so if it goes back to how they were taught, right? So if you go and look at the education that the current crop of leaders received, a lot of them were in a class, and they were part of an educational system where what I call the tyranny of the average pretty much held. So essentially, the focus of the class was in explaining the mechanics of business, how to read a financial statement, how to optimize a supply network, and so on. Nothing wrong with that. At the same time, the class typically is pitched to the average student, and the knowledge that people receive are commodified, and they're in modules, and so it's like, so imagine somebody's brain, a leader's brain, they have different boxes in them, one for marketing, one for operations, one for finance, and some people have bigger boxes for some things than others. But I think where the leaders have failed is, I think the personalization part comes in the application of this content. So one could take all of this information, and the way that one applies it to one's particular organization is what makes the difference. And I think at this point, people are trying to apply, generalizations to very specific contexts. And I think we have trained leaders who do really well looking in the rearview mirror. They want to know what the benchmarks are, what the historic, moments that we can learn from that we apply to today's situation. Guess what? I think both the two big phenomena that we are facing right now, I think both are so extraordinary. We already have, what I would call the $1 trillion virus. This is 9/11 multiplied by Katrina. This is no small event that we are facing. And then I think the unrest that we are seeing, highly exceptional event. I think both of those call for very specific skill sets that have to be brought to bear, and people have not learned those things, right? So for example, in the case of COVID-19, one needs to have an understanding of healthcare management, emergency preparedness, epidemiology to some degree. How do you read the statistics? What matters? What doesn't matter? How does one really right size the scale of the phenomenon? And I think the reason people keep asking me, why is the stock market acting so weirdly, right? One day it's down, one day it's up. And by this time, I had a friend who called me 2 months ago and said, prepare for the Dow Jones to be at 10,000 in 2 months. He said, you better get out of your retirement now. And well, that hasn't really happened. So the reason is that people are not able to understand the phenomenon that we are facing. The business leaders are reacting at different levels. Some people are still optimistic, some people are neutral, some people are somewhat pessimistic, because they don't understand what we face, right? Is this a temporary phenomenon? Is this something that is massive? Is this something that can be adjusted in some ways? I think people don't quite know. And so I think it goes back to at what point do people bring in their individuality as leaders in circumventing problems of this scope and size. And I know C-suite leaders, for example, who did not want to acknowledge the Black Lives Matter movement, And finally, people had to convince them, no, let's just go listen to people of color and in our organization, and let's just hear them out. You don't have to say anything, just hear them out. We'll do a listening session. And I think people come out of that, feeling so awakened, but then they have an action impulse. They want to do something.
Yeah.
But sometimes when people do something abruptly, without, kind of getting all the stakeholders on the same page and having done the right analysis, it falls apart. It lacks credibility. And so I think the second part of it is that understanding the people side, that everybody is different and everybody wants something different from the organization. There are some people where if the CEO sits down with them for 5 minutes and says, Glenn, what do you want from AT&T, Amazon, whatever it is, what is it that you want from the company? I mean, that is going to be something that would make their day. They would post on social media. They would say that this is the kind of organization where people are actually listening. I may not get everything I want, but at least the CEO knows what I want, right? And we've lost that. We have large organizations. Imagine a company with 50, 100, 200,000 people. I mean, you have middle managers who then have subordinates report to them. They completely lost track. The sorts of problems that the CEO is solving is very different from the ground realities of the individual employees. And as a result of that, people feel disconnected. They feel like, oh, we're just getting something. It's not clear if that's of value. And it's not even clear if the CEO even knows who I am and what makes me tick or what brings me to work every day,
Sandeep, boy, what a way to start this conversation. You said so many powerful things. And then, Scott, I'd like for you to jump in on this. Number one, we lack intimacy. Fundamentally, there's a disconnection because people don't believe in the things that they're told, and they crave greater intimacy. And when they feel that intimacy, they want to take action. Much like you said, once they had that learning session, people began to think of things, think of ways that they can help. But yet when they ask what the actions are, oftentimes there is no plan to put in place. Why?
Okay.
Because what we've learned from analyzing standardization and institutional strategies over the years, we limit individuals rather than enable their individual capacity. And so now that there are these two monumental crises in front of us, and the time is called for people to act, they're just waiting for direction.
Right.
So, and this has become very true. And so what typically happens, and again, you can react to this, Scott, you can react, but what I find in these extreme cases, and I see the extremes of personalization and standardization playing out right now during these moments of crises. And it goes back to the other thing that you said. You said they lead based upon what they've learned or what they've been taught. That's how they lead.
Exactly.
And we're finding standardization, in this case, reacting to two big things that are extraordinarily personal in very extreme ways,
Right.
because they believe that if they go extreme, they can neutralize and they can feel that they can come back to what makes them feel safe. And so I'll transition this actually back to you, Sandeep, because I'd like for you to react to the following statement that Scott, our friend Scott, made just a few months ago in a Forbes article when he said, a crisis of this magnitude, and he was really referring to COVID-19, has the power of putting us all in a state of disorientation because we can't lean on the old standards and those things that used to give us comfort because they aren't relevant anymore. How do you react to that? And then, Scott, if you can react to Sandeep's response.
Yeah, basically, so I was recently talking to a student and she was explaining to me the company that she works for, they have a diversity working group. And she said, we all got together when all the Black Lives Matter marches were going on. And I said, well, what happened? And she said, everyone came and they were all very supportive and nice. It's like, okay, great. And then what happened? And she said, then we went back to work. So the idea is when people are disoriented, so taking Scott's idea of disorientation, what are some of the things that we observe? First of all, we have a paralysis, and we have, as a result of that, we have inaction. Basically, people are saying, oh my God, I don't want to do anything that's going to blow things up. Okay. I may have said one thing that is really bad, and that may blow things up. So I'm going to err on saying, oh, I want to be there for you, Glenn, but I mean, that's it. Like, I'm not really going to get into, hey, let's put together a plan of action, because the risk seems very large, because I don't understand what I'm dealing with. I feel like I don't have the expertise, and then that leads to agency, which is, who am I here to solve this problem? Is it up to me to solve the problem? Will I be politically hurt if I solve this problem? Things of this nature. So there is the disorientation leads to inaction and paralysis. And so a lot of people, report this happening, all over the place, where people don't know what to do, right? And the second part of it is that during crises and moments of disorientation, people are trying to learn. Everyone is trying to get involved and saying, let's learn. And they go about learning in a particular way. Some people learn better from books, so they go looking for books. Some people learn better from peer-reviewed journal articles, so that's what they're looking for. Pretty soon, they arrive at a point where they say, there's nothing out there, that is really going to help me in these scenarios, because what I'm facing is quite extraordinarily different. So what they resort to is social learning. So you have people, forming support groups. You have people at all levels, saying, so I've been invited to a social community of deans. I've been invited to a social community of tech leaders. I've been invited to a social community of HR leaders. They're all trying to, put their, heads together and say, let's engage in social learning. Let's try to figure out what are the best practices that your organization has already learned and that I can benefit from. And so I think, so there are two kind of tangible ideas there in terms of what one experiences. And my hope is that the learning is going to actually accelerate, more proactive, engagement with both these moments, rather than kind of either a knee-jerk inaction or saying that somebody else is going to do it. It's not my issue. I hope people are able to kind of process that and get to, some sort of more proactive engagement, I would say. Over to you, Scott.
That's wow, man. I feel like, Glenn, I think I just met a long lost brother. My goodness, I don't know, separated from birth. I don't know what it is, but I'm with you. One of the things that I'm really excited to think this through with you, one of the reasons is because of our common experience in academia, even though we might be on different sides of the university. And the one thing I'm seeing coming from your comment about this last quote was something that's come up time and time again in my own thoughts, and that is people just dream of and desire freedom so much. It's all they can think about until they get it. And then they don't want it anymore because it scares the hell out of them. And I think one thing that you and I have the benefit of, and it's one of the gifts of our occupation, and that is the one-on-one time we do get with students, not as teacher-student, but as advisee-advisor, right? We get to kind of play what I might call in the sort of the village back in Mali, where that taught me pretty much everything I know. It gets us sort of that elder relationship in a way that's esteemed differently from credentials. It's more human. And I think that's something that most people outside of academia don't really get unless they've had a chance to be the elder part, not just the junior. And so what I'm thinking, and I'm curious about your thoughts on this, when we're advising students, right, do you run into this where we see a student who is kind of coming into their own? Maybe they started off in medical, sort of a medical school, sort of medical track, and they realized the bio or the OChem just didn't do it. So they kind of start switching. They might move to marketing or psychology or something. But what I find when they get into that moment, when they finally cut the cord and said, I'm no longer a pre-med student, that when we go to the next step and say, so what do you want to do with your one and precious life, buddy? they have no clue.
Yeah.
And it's not that they have no clue, but it's what you talked about. It's a paralysis of indecision. And so what happens is there's so many choices, they're afraid to make any one of them because they feel that the stakes are so high. So what I'm curious from your perspective as somebody that bridges both the academic side with the sort of student relationship and mentorship, but also on the business side, how do you see this paralysis of choice in business in terms of its relation to what we see with our students all the time when they're finally told, do whatever you want. And the first thing they want to do is say, well, could you just tell me what should I do?
Exactly. Yeah. I think, so a few, kind of responses to that, Scott. I think that's great.
Sure.
So the first thing is, I'll maybe, since you're an anthropologist, maybe I can offer a story.
Please. Oh, hey man, that's all we got. All we have is stories. Everything else is just packaging.
So I will let you unpack the symbolism and all of that But basically a few years ago, we uncovered a phenomenon, in our university, and the phenomenon was like, you heard of the boomerang, kid, right?
Yes.
Goes to college and moves back with mom and dad.
Yes.
We were having boomerang student workers. So basically you had somebody who, they came to the university, they were, in an undergrad program, and they were part of, sort of a, student services where they were advising international students, running an orientation for new students, whatever it is. And they bought into what our institution, was offering them so much that they were unwilling to explore what lay outside.
Yeah.
And we were like, no, you're a student worker in a business school, so we are training you to be the next leader of AT&T. We want you to go lead Coca-Cola, or we want you to start a company that becomes the next Google. Those are the kinds of aspirations we want to leave you with. And instead, I think what we sometimes find is that people are unwilling to leave the warmth and comfort of something that they know to explore something that they view as risky. And I think the result of that is, sometimes people actually come back. So they will work for 2 years and they call me and say, hey, and I'm like, great, let's talk as alumni. What do you want your school to look like? And 15 minutes later, I realized they're asking me for a job. They basically want to find out if they can come back and work for me. And I keep trying to tell them, look, don't think that this higher education is a place where you can come and just like retire and there's no work going on. We work really hard, And so, again, what I think is a few things are going on. I think the first thing is, I think students are afraid of the unknown, right?
Yes.
And they have not adequately developed a model of the external world, or a model of what life itself is through all their experiences. So they lack some experience. As a result of that, they're going to say things like, gosh, I don't know, if I want to work in, if I ask them. So for example, I just did a workshop for students on career preparedness and so on, just helping them on their way out. And I was asking them, do you want to work for a large company or a small company? Do you want to start your own business? Do you think you're a better fit at JP Morgan or Google? Where are you a better fit? And after a while, people are like, look, I don't know. Because the other part of this is, not only do they not understand the external world so much, they don't understand themselves.
Exactly.
Right. Okay.
So the human being, ourselves, for us, that's the final frontier. We can create all kinds of models of what's out there. So they don't know if they will react under pressure, if they don't know if they'll be persistent. They don't know if they can manage conflict and politics in a very ambiguous environment. They don't know if they're going to be learning or productivity demands placed on them that are so high that they may or may not be successful. And so I think, a lot of them, therefore, revert to, some sort of simplistic behaviors rather than jumping off the cliff. You have to jump off the cliff when you graduate.
Yeah.
You
Right.
basically don't know what's out there, and you have to create opportunities. You have to build your reputation.
So
And
deep.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm just going to ask you. I'm going to sort of dig deeper into this thought because
Oh, good.
It's one thing, it's very easy for us to sit and talk amongst other professors or colleagues and such and say, oh, these kids, man, why don't they just accept these opportunities? They can't see what they've got in front of them. They could change the world. We can say that and we can blame it on the kids or maybe the world or the era that they've been raised in. But ultimately, we're the elders, so it's the world that we created for them.
Yes.
What are we doing what are we doing to unintentionally recreate these same exact barriers that you and I and Glenn are trying to knock down? Because it seems to me that we're very good with our words. We're very good with thinking this through and talking across silos. We're great at thinking about this, but obviously maybe we're not so great at acting on it. So where is it that our actions and our words are disconnected? And I'm literally, if nobody else wants to take the blame, I'll take it. Where are my actions and my words failing?
Yeah, I think what I see is that we have given up the idea that ambiguity is important.
Oh, I love you, man.
So the idea is, if you go and reflect on how you teach today, at least again, reflecting on me, reflecting on what my faculty are doing, a few of them are willing to work with students and give them problems that involve ambiguity. It's just like, okay, there's a company, there's a profile, they're into frozen seafood, sales are down, go. It's like, oh, wait, what do you want us to do? Well, go study it and come back and let me know what's going on, right? I'm telling you what the problem is, and there's a company in decline, and I want you to go understand the root causes and then come back and explain to me what is going on. And a lot of students struggle with this. A lot of students want structure. They want to know what's in the exam. And so we're only able to achieve this in kind of upper division or graduate courses. But I think even, the Socratic style of teaching, I'm not sure if it's, being pursued to the level that, it could be. Why are some people poor? Why, what is the number one way to get out of poverty? And if you type into Google, you'll get some very strange results for these. You will not really, you'll get incoherent answers. But can you form a theory of poverty, in your mind, and explain to others, why is it that some people are poor, for example? That might be interesting. Glenn, were you saying something?
No, Sandeep, I'm just inspired by your words. And I have to, first of all, I'm so appreciative that you've taken the time for us to have this conversation. And I'm even more excited that you're going to be a featured speaker at the summit on October 30th. Because this is the kind of conversation that people want to hear. You're not defending higher education in the past. You're bold enough to say, hey, here are things that are missing. And by the way, it's not just higher education's fault. These are systemic issues that thread from higher education to corporate America and other industries throughout the world that have placed these incredible limitations on the individual to a point to where both of you are talking about that it almost freezes us. We feel trapped because things are supposed to be defined for us in this highly ambiguous world. I'm going to read you something, and I didn't plan on this, Sandeep.
No, please do. This is fun.
No, because this is what it was all about, and I'm trying to, take on what you asked for. You said, let's help us unpack this stuff.
Yeah.
I'm gonna give you. So, what happens when the business or the institution defines the individual? Here's what happens. You're told what to do inside the box you're given.
Correct.
Okay? So this is how one leader reacted to that situation. So real data, feedback here from an executive who said, so what's
Fantastic.
what's the pro? Like, what's the good thing about that? And you actually alluded to it already. The pro is there are clear expectations. You know exactly what you're supposed to do. Now, what's the con? What's the con? It takes us away from our leadership style, what comes most naturally to us. Often the leader will not feel as confident in the task because in being told what to do, sometimes that actually conflicts with how that leader would approach the problem and challenge to begin with. And this
Right.
awkwardness is then detected by his or her team and can make them feel less effective as a leader. I mean, could you?
There's a lot in there. Yeah.
No, but
Yeah.
there is a lot.
Yeah.
What at the root of what we're talking about here is the conflict that we feel as individuals. And thus, it then becomes difficult for us to do what we really want to do, what we really think that should happen. I mean, could you imagine, and I can tell you this for a fact, 80% of the workforce in corporate America,
Right.
80%
Yeah.
feel that they must assimilate to this way of doing things. 80%.
Yeah. That's a lot.
No, but
Yeah.
this defines and explains why we're stuck right now.
Absolutely.
At a time where this should be one of the biggest moments of innovation and opportunity in modern history. Now, let me explain why that's not happening. At least a perspective, Sandeep.
Yeah.
You and Scott can kind of react to this from a higher education perspective. Here's the flip side. What happens when the individual can actually define the business? It goes back to what Scott was talking about at the beginning, that we want all this freedom, but then when we're given the freedom, we don't act on the freedom. So what is the con of this particular environment? My leaders would be threatened. Okay. Well, what's the pro? Well, the pros are you get more engagement from all involved. Again, another data point from a different executive. You get more engagement from all involved in coming up with the solutions because it has more meaning to them. They take more ownership and they want to see the solution work. You also get a more sustainable solution because you're now included in a wider perspective of the problem to be solved. And this creates a healthy culture where people want to come to work and be involved in redefining the business in how we collectively thrive and move forward. So again, I'll stop there, but I like to kind of volley it back to you, Sandeep.
Love it.
Because here's my question. Why or what? Let's forget about the past. What can higher education do to prepare students for an environment? And let's be clear on this. We're talking about preparing future leaders. We're talking about Gen Z, I would say at this point, that don't want to assimilate, but yet when they go into the corporate world that's led by people who learned about and are incentivized to practice standardization, there's a big conflict here. Sandeep?
Oh, there's a lot there.
Because this is what we're solving for.
Yeah. So the first thing is that work has an all-encompassing, overpowering place in our lives. And I think, Scott, you mentioned happiness earlier. I think a lot of people look for happiness through work. They view themselves as, hey, I work for this company. That's how they introduce themselves. That's how they think of themselves. And in many cases, honestly, work has a higher place than their own health or family. I mean, this is true, actually. People don't want to hear it, but it is actually the truth. So, and I think there's a long strand of, a discussion around this idea, but Americans particularly so, embrace the idea of industry, and they want to think of themselves as industrious people that work hard to achieve, what they want. You got to go get it. And that's kind of the attitude. And so I think if you look at books that have been written, I mean, there've been a lot of discussion on why there's this concept of the overworked American. Americans are overworked, and if you go back to even the cartoons, if you go back to the Jetsons,
Yeah.
remember the Jetsons? So we were going to press buttons and big things would happen, right? And then we would just sit back and talk about the state of the world and enjoy art and sip wine. That's what we were going to do, right? We were going to have all this leisure time. But in fact, that has not happened. In fact, it has gone the other way. Even with automation, even with technology, I think you have work occupying a massive part of people's headspace, heart space. This is something that is their work is who they are. And the story I always tell my Asian friends when I go visit them in terms of how you understand Americans is people are so committed to their work here, and I think that level of commitment is something that is very important for them. And you see it when there are layoffs, right? Because people are completely unmoored. They don't know what to do, because that's all they knew, right? And my favorite story is, Bryant, the head coach, University of Football. I think a year after he retired, he died. He just couldn't handle the idea that he had no work. He couldn't handle the idea that there was something beyond X's and O's in football. I mean,
who am I if I'm not that?
Yeah, right? Exactly. Who am I, right? And so, I think the first thing is that work has an overpowering place in our life. But the second thing is, I think people are looking for solutions in all the wrong places. And I see Gen Z folks, and you ask them, what is it you want from the workplace? And they want things that are unusual. So they will say that I want to, talk to my CEO. I want to know how my CEO thinks about this particular legislation. I want to, so to some degree, they feel like they should bring themselves to work, but they also feel that, the research shows that they have very little loyalty, to the workplace. They are going the other direction in terms of saying, I will sacrifice economic gain for doing some other things. I want to go hiking, etc. So I know people who have retired in their 40s, or I know people who only do 50% kind of a job. So there is some there's something to be understood there as well. But overall, I think within an organization, definitely this reminds me of there is social control inside of organization, right? And so recently I was talking to a friend of mine, and he said he wants to do kind of diversity work within the organization. And I said, how does it look like? He said, I want to just get people together and talk. And I said, okay, well, why aren't you doing it? And it's like, yeah, I'm waiting for a meeting with my boss, and he only had time next week, and I'm going to run it by him. And then if he's okay with it, and then I'm going to make sure that I don't create too many waves with the upper floor. You know how it is. And so people and I'm like, look, the stuff's happening today, right? Like, don't you want to talk about stuff today? It's like, yeah, I know, but I really better wait. So it's like people are always waiting for approval on the darndest things.
Yeah.
And I think, sometimes, as managers, I think we emphasize risk over value. And I think you go to large American corporations, HR is very powerful in terms of managing risk. You're going to get a call from HR under a whole host of circumstances, or nowadays it's email or whatever. Also, I think the way managers are evaluated, it very much, goes along the lines of, getting people to focus on action rather than thinking about ways by which we can improve the work, for example, right? So let's say we tell people, look, you're working 40 hours. I want you to take 4 hours every week. And your job in those 4 hours is to figure out how you're going to do the same job better. Okay. And it doesn't have to be, a 500-page book. but feel free to write a 2-paragraph, a bulleted list of here are some actions, here are some things that can change, and everyone gets better. Why don't we do that? And a lot of times people will say there's no incentive for that. Look, it's not my job. I see stuff, but there's also some cynicism. One of my big worries about this moment is that I see cynicism going up. Where people are cynical of institutions. They have a love-hate relationship. They know that, they need the paycheck, because they have to pay the mortgage, because they want to live in a house. Yeah. But they're also cynical of the dehumanizing effects of the organization. And so suddenly people have become very cynical of police everywhere, right? That's one institution that has lost trust, during this, this whole set of events here. But when people start losing faith in institutions, then you have, bigger issues. Then people believe that institutions are no longer serving their interests, but they have to participate. So what you see now is a lot of cynical participation. Yeah, I'm going to participate. Yeah, I'm going to do the work. And yeah, it's not that meaningful. And then I'm going to go home and then I'm going to be a video game king, and that's where I'm going to shine, right? So it's like, so do you know what I mean? I mean, it's like they're getting their fix elsewhere. But it's a shame though, because, there can be more alignment between the two, I don't think.
I was just saying, is this distrust, and I'm with you on this, the distrust in institutions, and I think at least as long as I've been alive, that's something that I've seen just continually on the rise, is a falling level of trust with institutions. And I'm wondering if it's with institutions themselves. Institutions are just things that people put together. So we create them. It's not like they are there and we can't do anything to change them. That's us. If we made it, we can change it. So I'm wondering, what is your view on this question? Are we running away from institutions, or are we say institutions, or are we running away from assimilation? In fact, I don't think we're running away from institutions, because people are still coordinating and organizing and creating new types of institutions, like those, like the all these people that are organizing right now with this most amazing historical alignment of social movements. Yeah. What I think I do see is that they're not running away from anything. I see a group of youngsters that are youth that are running to something. They're not running away from something, right? Yeah. I think in my generation, it was about running away, like denying stuff, saying, that's not me, I'm doing something different. And as long as you weren't doing that, you kind of got your box checked. I think what's going on now is people are running towards interconnectivity. They want to connect. They want to be part of something. They want to be a person before they are a data analyst. They want to be a person before they're a teacher, because that's what gets them excited. Correct. That's what brought them to teaching. And I think if there's one thing the elders can learn from the youth, is that while we always look about, why are you running away from that? Why are you leaving this perfectly good thing behind? If we change our classes and start not looking at what they're running away from, but what they're running to, we might find that they're very much doing what we hope that they could do, but we're too blind to see it.
That's interesting. Yeah, that's very interesting, actually. I think there's also an intergenerational moment here, Scott, because I think, so one part of it is institutions, but also there's kind of a intergenerational dynamic here. I know there are people that don't want to become like their dads or moms, right? They believe that, that they can be more, that they can be more engaged or more, informed of various issues and so on. So, I think in general, people are running towards meaning. They want to understand. They want meaningful, sort of, spaces, meaningful sorts of conversations. But I'm not sure where we go from here, though. I think because there is a lot of, for example, in Seattle, we had this, there's a group of people cordoned off a portion of the city, and they started living themselves, and they kept out the police for a while. But after a while, it sort of collapsed. I mean, the police stayed away for a while, and then 2 people got shot, including an African American person.
Wow.
Well, the police came back, so it's a mess. I mean, I am all for the expression of oneself through those kinds of entities, but it creates, it doesn't create momentum beyond the here and now, right? So it becomes this kind of sporadic celebration rather than something that builds up. And I think that leads to its own cynicism, where people feel like, we did something like super innovative, super outside the structure, and we were expressive. We said what we had to say, and we took a stand, and so on. So we had voice, in other words. But I think where they struggle with is, how does one translate that into enduring structural commitment?
Yeah. Well, I'll give a perspective, and then we could speak for hours. But I'm gonna.
Yeah, this is wonderful.
We will speak for hours. This is just the beginning.
This is awesome. I can do this all day. Yeah.
No, it's fantastic. So
this is my space. Yeah.
It is your space, man.
Clearly, so let me give a perspective, and then so I actually believe, Sandeep, that what we're experiencing now in society is going to trickle into corporate America more and more and more each day. And in many respects, corporate America is lucky that we're dealing with COVID, because if everyone were to be coming back to work, there may be a revolution. I mean, this has been the moment that I think many people have been waiting for, with respect to, hold on a second, who am I as an individual? Where does my individuality matter? Because these examples I gave you earlier about the business defining the individual and the individual defining the business, it can't be one way or the other, right? We have to find that healthy balance, but standardization just can't scale in its current form. And part of this leads to my direct response to what you're asking, Sandeep, is today, much like a student, again, I'd like for you to react to this, the employee is going to, and they are already expecting more from their employer. And it's not just about what they think about Black Lives Matter and other social issues. It's, how can I be part of the solution? And how can you, as my employer, create the environment, conditions, and systemic opportunities for us to be part of the solution? And historically, these things have been one-off tactics, right, to just neutralize. But I don't believe that that's going to be accepted anymore. In fact, those organizations that try those short-term tactical approaches, they're going to lose top talent. In fact, someone recently asked me, well, what's going to happen with these 40 million people who are unemployed? And I know that number's growing. When they're given the opportunity to come back for work, there's a lot of top talent there. They're going to have greater expectations. So I'm sharing this because I believe that in higher education, because this is going to, this is part of the whole value chain, there's going to be an expectation for higher education to help prepare students for what is this new reality. And part of the new reality is it's okay for the student or prospective talent to have greater expectations from their employee. So in other words, what's going to happen next? There's going to be some systemic changes, and they're not going to be those driven by compliance. They're actually going to be systems that need to be reviewed, because the employee isn't going to be tolerating the old ways of doing things. Thoughts, Sandeep?
Yeah. I think talking to the students, what I see is that the first thing that they want is for people to acknowledge the moment that we are in.
Yes.
So imagine that I'm teaching a course on financial derivatives, and the world is burning, but I walk into class and say, okay, let's go. In the last class we talked about this, and now I'm going to talk to you about call and put options. And I mean, for them, that would be deafening. So the first thing I think that I see very clearly in terms of what is being formed is you have to acknowledge the moment as a leader, as a manager. You cannot just kind of say, yeah, stuff happens, but okay, let's get back to doing work in telecom, retail, healthcare, logistics, whatever we do. I mean, it's going to lead to a lot of, lost productivity, because people are going to go around saying, why won't he talk about it? What's going on? Why can't he just acknowledge that this is like a big deal? So, so I think the first thing that I see is that acknowledgement piece, and that they see that as a starting point towards engagement, and the whole idea that, I'm just working for a company, always creates the position of neutrality, right? So a lot of leaders, a lot of managers are trying to say, again, back to tyranny of the average. Gosh, I don't want to rile people up. I'm going to keep it like, drive this right down the middle of the road. Okay, don't want to piss off anyone. Just going to be calm over here and say, well, and use all kinds of evasive words. Well, Scott, you raised some very interesting points. I'm just going to say that and leave the meeting and not care and not do anything. Yeah. And so I think so tolerance for bullshit hopefully will go down. Yeah. But certainly I think there will be an interest in saying, yeah, we're supposed to talk about this other stuff, but I mean, you have to start acknowledging, and this a lot of times in like professional schools, like business, law, engineering, and so on. People feel like, hey, it's my job to teach them financial derivatives. Who am I to talk to them about racism? Mm-hmm. Who am I to talk to them about systemic racism? I don't even know what that means, right? So, well, you're a professor, you can educate yourself, and I can share some articles with you if you want. You can take a look, and we're not asking you to be an expert. Same for a leader. I'm not asking the CEO to be an expert in critical race theory. There are enough professors who are that. But what we want the CEO to do, the VP to do, a GM to do, is to say, look, something big is happening, and I don't understand it, okay? And I want us to do good. I'm not even sure what that looks like. So acknowledge the moment and acknowledge the ambiguity. It is no longer the case that you are, as a leader, expected to have all the answers. Please stop that charade. Please stop it, okay? Nobody's expecting you to come and say, oh, I'm a strong man, I have all the answers. No. Say, look, something big is happening. I don't understand it. I'm not sure anybody does, but I want to piece together some conversation where we want to be agents of good, okay? And how does one do that in this moment? Yeah. Or even how do we simply engage this moment? What is your perspective? What do you think we should do? And if there are some quick wins, maybe we can just go off and quickly send out an email saying that, that we stand by, PR will take care of that. I mean, that's not even the VP's, contribution. We all know that.
You know what, Sandeep, I want to jump in here real quick because
go.
No, because, excuse me, but you're bringing up one of the most fundamental things that people want to see in leaders. Don't act or try to be the expert.
Right.
Things are moving way too fast.
Right.
I mean, that's why I often find even the term thought leadership amusing. Because if that's what you are, it better be your full-time job, because otherwise, how can you keep up with it all? Yeah. And so I think this goes back to the importance of vulnerability. Part of what has given me hope in this process is, parents that have teenage or young adults as kids, they're finding that their kids are the teachers and the parents are the students.
Right.
And I think the same thing applies to higher education. Why can't their students be the professors for a half a day and let the professor.
They already are, man.
Let the professor be the student, because you know what? This is what gets us to that balance of standardization and personalization. It gets us to recognize ourselves less as part of tribes and more as being human. And so just some perspective. Scott, did you want to play off this before I shift gears? Because I want to talk just a little bit about Sandeep's white paper that he recently published.
No worries. No, this is great. Yeah.
Yeah, just a quick connection with all of this. And I guess the one thing I would like to do real quickly is, Glenn, my affinity for Proverbs, because Proverbs take something that's very important and very complicated and allows it to come out in a way that every person around us can understand it. So if we are truly going for inclusivity, we need more Proverbs. We need more metaphors that are inclusive and big. And you know what? One thing that I'm thinking about is we're talking about this in higher ed and business. How do we get others, including youth who haven't yet joined a silo, how do we get them into this conversation? And it makes me think of a topic that one of my mentors in grad school focused on for a time as an anthropologist, and that was Utopia. And I think it's an interesting moment to think about Utopia, because that's what we're trying to do in a way. We're trying to make a better, greater, perfect, just a better society, right?
Yeah.
The coolest thing about this guy's work, Sandeep Robertson, A.F. Robertson, was that he studied utopian movements all throughout time and space, right? Different cultures, not just a certain variety. And the one thing he found that they all had in common is that they had one failure. And that failure is the ability to reproduce. The thing is, that shouldn't be surprising, because here it is. And you're all gonna get the metaphor in a second, I think, but I think it's important. Why did we create a utopia? We weren't running away from things. We were running towards something bigger and more inclusive, and something that we felt would make us more human and more of a society, more of a species, right? And then the first thing we do once we've achieved our utopia, right? Look at us, we're having a utopia. Everything's good again. The Coca-Cola commercial from the 70s. However, what's the biggest thing they do? They want to reproduce the utopia. So they've standardized it. And so the next generation that comes in is coming into this utopia, this perfect thing that we built for you. And what's the first thing they want to do? Run to something else. And that's why the utopia doesn't work, because what we're doing is we're failing to listen to who leads, and that's the youth. We are elders, we guide, but the youth is the innovation. That's what we're failing to recognize, and that's what our standardized processes fail to recognize. And even those of us that consider ourselves as visionaries in terms of being able to create a new normal or a next normal or an inclusive newness, right, to humankind, the biggest risk that we face is the fact that as soon as we do it and as soon as we think that we've made some success, the very first thing we're going to do, even without knowing it, is we're going to standardize that to make sure that everybody else does the same thing. And we've just neutralized everything we've ever done.
Yeah, very, 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 very interesting. I think a lot of that speaks to me, Scott. So I don't know if you've heard this, but I've heard of two models within higher education for what a teacher represents.
Okay.
And right, so I think one of them is called sage on the stage.
Yes, stage on the stage. They're dead, man.
Yeah, exactly. And I think what you're talking about is what we call a guide on the side.
Yes, I love you, man.
So enough of sage on the stage. We want guide on the side.
Amen.
And then I think one of the things that, and I've been successful with converting maybe, just a couple faculty on this, but I've been trying to motivate this idea of creating curriculum around questions. So, okay, you're going to create, you're going to teach Anthro 101. Help me identify 5 questions you want students to answer during the entire semester, right? And we would like to go beyond definitions. So do not say, what is culture? I mean, well, sure, then just go look it up in Wikipedia and it's like, boom, done, right? I mean, it's like, go away. But what is it? How is it that you want people to engage? And to me, I mean, the whole idea of the examined life is through questions, right? So we hand out too many answers. So-and-so said this, and so-and-so came up with a framework for these. These are 3 tools to solve this problem. Answers. We're just giving them answers. So they're graduating with answers and they go looking for questions. And so instead, if you ask them a question, so let's say in a finance course, it's how do you judge the financial health of a company? That's the question I want you to be able to answer by the time you're done. Or what constitutes a strong brand in a marketing, so we can think of more causative questions, and some could be descriptive, that's okay, but they all allow for multiple answers, Glenn, to bring it back to personalization, right? Is to say, look, I'm just going to give you the gift of 5 questions. That's my gift to you this quarter. I've really thought through these questions and I think they're important questions. And I'm going to leave them with you. And I'm just going to, the way we're going to run the classes, I'm just going to, arrive and just maybe start engaging with one question and then suggest readings that I believe can help us answer this. But you know what? You can go off and find your own readings. And if you want the class to hear about something that you believe is important, come back and share it with us. And we'd like to understand if, your perspective varies from the norm within the class, or if you have something, so very interesting that it can be incorporated or it can change the way the class dynamic it currently is constituted. And I think, this can be very energizing, I think.
No. First of all, you've just defined the class, the methodology for the class about questions that is really teaching people about ambiguity. That's the beauty of what you just said. I love what you said. We give them the answers and they're looking for questions when it should be the other way around.
Right. And
you just defined the dangers of standardization, that it has to be these 3 things or these 10 answers. It's the other way around. Anyway, keep going, Sandeep.
No, I think Scott seems very animated. I'm sure he has things to respond. Say yes.
Yeah, man. And by the way, I'm so with you on this question mode because let's remember what's going on right here. Let's remember let's take a pulse. Where are we? Time and space. Okay, this is the information age. All we have is answers. As a matter of fact, we have so many answers. We have too many answers, and that's a good thing. And so the worst thing we can do is try to give them answers or a curated list of answers that we think are out here. The only thing that we can do is not just, in my view, teach them about how to form questions, right? We can model questions and help them learn how to ask questions for themselves. But the most important thing for me is the second side to that asking questions, and that is the curious and critical thinking mentality that has the resources to find their own answers. And I say plural answers on purpose because Picasso said it really well when he said with his cubism, I refuse to look at things in one direction. I need as many dimensions as possible. And you might not recognize what I see, but this is my world.
Yeah. Yeah.
Let's make the world more cubist, man. And let's do this for the students, man.
Yeah, absolutely. The other thing to think about, Scott, is I think frequently we are giving people models of reality.
Yes.
And those are to be distinguished from reality itself. And so I've given you so many models of reality, and now, I've graduated, I'm in a nonprofit in a different part of the world. Everything's different from, but what am I going to do? Start applying the models that I learned, right?
That's right.
A model is only a reflection or an abstraction of reality. It is not, in fact, reality, right? So there is this kind of famous saying that all models are wrong, some models are useful, right? so frequently we are providing them models of reality, which are sometimes useful in reality and sometimes not. And I think in some situations you have to be adaptable to the reality that you find yourself in, and construct your course of action. And you're going to make mistakes, but don't be so beholden to the model that you're like clinging to it for dear life now. But the train's about to leave the station, so we just taught you about airplanes.
Yeah.
But the train's leaving. Okay, that it goes on tracks. I mean, you got to get in the train. This is different, you know.
Love it.
So I think about that too, on how we are giving people too many models, too many ways of understanding reality, and they kind of equate it with reality, before they graduate, again leading to, and same thing. I mean, Glenn, you talk about corporate leadership. My God, I mean, people will tell you, okay, can we use Porter's 5 forces? Where's my SWOT? Where's my SWOT? This is CEO, he wants, where's my SWOT? That's his favorite saying. It's like, want to see the SWOT analysis. Like, okay, that's one framework of understanding what we face, but but that cannot be the be all and end all, in terms of understanding. So models are useful. We kind of do the SWOT, but then we're like, does this really capture the moment, or is there something more we want to say about this? I mean, that's kind of the next transition, right?
Yeah. Well, so let me. Boy, again, we're way over time at this point.
No, it's okay.
but let's just have fun at this point. But
I'm all for it, by the way.
So, a couple things that you said there, Sandeep, and Scott, this whole notion of utopia, powerful. You mentioned earlier, how one's work becomes their identity. And, one thing that, again, it's been part of this whole discussion, but let me kind of put it in summary form here, is that more often than not, that employee's identity is the brand of the company they work for. Mm-hmm. And so when they're there, they feel so connected to the brand and everything that it stands for in the marketplace, that should they be asked to leave or things happen in their life and they're no longer associated with that brand, they lose a significant part of their identity. And the reason that they lose their identity is that they don't know and have never known who they are as individuals and how they can contribute to an institution to begin with.
Right.
And I want to just bring light to this, because in the work that, my organization does, I am shocked at how many people have trouble evaluating themselves.
Yeah.
Because they're so used to somebody else doing this for them. Again, just another point of realization that we as individuals that are part of these large institutions are now dealing with unknowns. And because they've relied so much on the institution's brand to give them the answers, this time there is no playbook. And yet this is an opportunity for that individual to help write that playbook. Yeah. Which now brings us to this incredible paper that you wrote titled The Future of Business Education. It's a commentary in the shadow of the COVID-19 pandemic. And I know we've talked a lot about these issues, but I'd really love for you to go into something that really caught my attention. And it was really twofold. What does the transformation of the business school look like? And I know there are two big topics, and you can take bites at each of these or blend them as you wish. But also, what does the evolution of online learning look like? But I really love what you said about the transformation of the business school, because your viewpoints are it should be influenced by the student.
Right. Yeah. So I actually believe that a series of things are going to kind of now be put in play that are going to have long-term and not just short-term impacts. There are definitely a whole lot of short-term operational impacts that deans and presidents are worrying about. How will fall look like? Where do we put the plexiglass? How do we ensure the safety of our students and faculty and staff? Sound familiar, Scott?
A little bit.
Yeah. Okay. And so I think how do we support immunocompromised faculty? lot of operational, sorts of things. But also, I think that other than what's happening on the surface, it feels like some big things are getting changed. I think so. So one of them, so I think of the transformation of the business school as kind of being shaped by the transformation of the student, and the transformation of the university and what its place in society, and transformation of the business world. If because the business world is going to change in dramatic ways, and we're already seeing new things, that are being put in place. And so I think you're going to have really a complex set of changes that are going to get enacted. And the more we, kind of are able to navigate this effectively, I think the better off, we are going to be. And so for the students, it's been very interesting that, I think many of them have adapted to being in an online environment, and they're able to, successfully navigate that. But I think this is just the beginning, because I think many of them are going to want different things. In fact, last year, one of the students told me that what he and others are facing is that they end up in university and their parents are paying the tuition, or they're working to pay the tuition. And they find that what they're learning in class is not demonstrably distinguishable from what is available on various free sources.
Yep.
Wow.
Okay. So this is something we have to take very honestly. And I think this was a lower division student, meaning the sophomore student. So person is still not taking very advanced courses, but still the person is saying, look, many of these concepts can be learned from a whole host of free or cheap sources. So I'm not understanding what value I'm getting from the university. So I'm completely lost, in terms of what am I gaining sitting in the classroom. So the student was also was known to be a troublemaker, was always asking questions, was correcting the faculty member, because faculty member would say something, he would look it up right away and say, Professor Scott, you said this, but on this site, I found this completely different, explanation. How do we, are you right, or this site that I found is right? And the professor has to respond to that, at the moment, right? So the person was really trying to get an education. But what that taught me is that students are going to, demand more, but they don't know what they want though. I think they approach knowledge as Lego blocks. They're thinking they're getting a big, red brick first, and they're going to put on some blue bricks on that, and then it's going to create a big, nice building. But they think they're looking for answers, But ultimately, if we help them develop the kind of the muscle that will allow them to disambiguate the world, it's like I'm dealing with all kinds of complexity. What really matters in this situation? If I can, look at a very complex web and say, yeah, this happening, this happening, these are the three other things that are happening. Well, but what really matters in that situation? What is, how do we help them get there? I think that is something that we'll have to work towards. And the other thing that I'm very hopeful of is having personalized education. Right now we have a class of 30, everybody is different. We are teaching fishes to climb trees. I mean, there are people who are, very different than what the subject that they're receiving, or they're getting an approach that is not really, lining up with how they learn. So, and then there are students who are way ahead of the norm, who feel like they're being held back. It's like, what the heck? So, oh, there comes Glenn's dog.
It's okay. This is the beauty of live podcast.
That's great. That's great. We're good. We're good.
Okay, keep going.
Yeah, so I think what technologies can really do is, bring out the power of assessments where we understand who you are, how you learn, how you think, and then based on that, rather than having one curriculum, we're able to kind of parcel off and think of like 5 pathways there are 5 different types of students, and then I can look at how everybody is doing, and then you have automated assessments to talk about not just how people are scoring on a quiz or a midterm that we give, but how they're learning. So we're getting accurate learning data as we go through the class. And that allows us to fully personalize, a course of education when it comes to a single student. So you get what you need to solve the problems you're facing, and I think it is, constantly collecting data to understand how much you learn. So if you're learning very quickly, they might actually ramp up the materials. But, the personalized learning is certainly very valuable for, especially I would say, technical subjects. I think that is, it can really scale, very well. But certainly, I hope we don't lose sight of, philosophy and reasoning and critical thinking, like the core of the university. But I also think that the current design of the university is flawed in the sense that we think of the course as a unit of analysis, and that once you're done in 4 years, you graduate. I mean, that's it. See you. I mean, we have no role to play in your lives. And so a few years ago, this guy from MIT, I think, came up with this concept of the 60-year-old curriculum. The idea is, how do we create a curriculum that maps your learning needs for 60 years? And the university keeps coming in to offer you various refreshers and as you go along. And so meaning that we have a enduring and stable role to play in your life, and we are supporting you as you go along. As you evolve, so do we. Yeah. And we sometimes may have a learning rate that is higher than what you are facing in your organization. But that's great, because now we can bring that and share that with you, and tell us, and we can tell you what's happening, what matters, what doesn't matter. And so I think these are the sorts of effects that I see. And I'm calling it, moving away from the traditional university model to university as a service. That it's just a broad, framework that is available to you as you go along in your life and as you try to solve problems. So where the learning is personalized to your strengths, and I think, but there we'll run into some challenges, because we always have the situation where, do you accentuate the strengths or work on your weaknesses, for example? So so how do we personalize? I don't think the problem is solved yet, but I think this is a very refreshing and energizing way for me to think about the future.
Well, I can tell you that personalized learning is in high demand.
Yeah.
And even in large corporations, and what we've learned ourselves is that a corporation can provide a playbook for how, what the values, mission, vision, what all those things are, and then a set of leadership competencies or behaviors, and then people are measured on how well they practice all those things. Mm-hmm. It can be extraordinarily overwhelming, especially if an individual doesn't quite believe in the way things were defined for them. Goes back to that again. And so, there is a move towards, again, how do we find that right balance by respecting the mission, vision, values, competencies, but yet how do we personalize that experience for the individual so that they could accomplish those items on their own terms? So they're anti-conformist, but yet they're respecting standardization. And what you then get is an employee experience that is much more rewarding, but they also feel that they're helping the organization evolve. And what we're finding from those more progressive HR executives is that this old way of, here's the playbook, follow it, that's how you'll be evaluated, has actually limited individual contribution in many cases. Has been the reasons why people have left organizations, because it's no longer about the brand, it's how they want to contribute. And so these are some of the dynamics that they're being faced with. So I really respect that point of view, because I believe that if we can get higher education to respect this more personalized way of learning, it's really, if I can simplify this, it's going to prepare the individual how to navigate very ambiguous corporate cultures.
Yes.
And I think that's probably, as I see it, not probably, one of the biggest things that a new employee, let alone one that's been there for 20 years, because the organization's been forced to reinvent or acquire or reestablish itself in the marketplace, of how do I navigate such a large institution where I don't know where I fit, how I can best contribute, or do I just play it safe and stay in the box? And as we've discussed, these upcoming generations don't want a box at all. So Scott, any last reflection on what Sandeep said so that we can...
All I'm going to say is I got to go get ready for an orientation like in 30 seconds. So I'm just going to say I look forward to seeing you in October, because we are nowhere near started, let alone finished. My dear brother, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Scott, thank you so much.
Take care.
You hang on to Sandeep. I'm just going to, thank you so much.
I'm here.
Sorry we went long, but...
It's all good. We didn't go long. We went short. It's just, we got to go bring some students in for Fairfield U.
It's okay. Scott, thank you so much. Okay. We'll talk later.
We'll see you soon. Bye-bye.
Sandeep, it has been an absolute joy. I thank you so much for your time. And thank you again. And we'll continue the conversation as we prepare for the summit here in October. But again, thank you for your time. And as I always say, when you lead in the age of personalization, you will see things that others don't. You will do what others won't. And you'll keep pushing when prudence says quit. Thanks again, Sandeep.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to Personalization Outbreak. Make sure to subscribe so you never miss a show. If you enjoyed the content, visit ageofpersonalization.com to check out our free streaming video series and learn how to get involved in the movement. I'm Glenn Yopes. I wish you a good day, and remember, without strategy, change is merely substitution, not evolution.